The moment we've all been waiting for. Okay, I am so excited to introduce Susan Panzica to you. But before I do, I have to share the story of how I got connected with her. So, in making discussions and plans for this human trafficking awareness event, Martha Seidler said, well, maybe we can do a guest speaker and have someone come. And I said, yeah, I just happened to be in contact with a girl. Her name's Lynette, and she works with Justice Network. And I had just gotten in contact with her a few months back in regards to doing a vendor event that they have coming up May 14th. Yes, May 14th. And so, they had contacted me about doing a crown-free table, and they're going to have a lot of other vendors there, and it's all ethical and fair trade. And so I said, well, this is an awesome network. I looked at their website, and I said, I think they have some speakers. And so I messaged her about that, and then I don't remember how I got in contact with NJ Coalition. I think I just started researching it and really liked what they were doing, so I reached out to NJ Coalition like that same day, just in case I couldn't get a speaker through Justice Network. And almost immediately got a response from NJ Coalition against human trafficking that Susan Panzica would be coming. And I don't know how I figured it out, but it turns out, she's also the executive director of Justice Network. And so it was this really organic connection that we have, and she lives locally, and she's involved with the Plant Church and in other things in the community. And she just has a powerful testimony. She's got a story that's published in Chicken Soup for the Soul. What's it called again? Somebody's Daughter. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So definitely look it up. But so she's going to be sharing, and I'm just really excited about this. So here we go. Everybody, Susan Panzica.
Yes, I was so excited. I am with the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking, which is a statewide organization, and I'll talk a little bit more about it further along in the presentation. But I recently moved to to Hewitt, and I saw that there was a request for a speaker a mile and a half from my house. And nothing's a mile and a half from my house. And I'm like, I'm on this one. And then when we saw the connection of how it all came about, it was definitely a God thing. I also want to let you know that I am going to go off script. I have the presentation from the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking. But the coalition is a very diverse group. There is made of faith-based groups, as well as other individuals from all walks of life. And if we had a community audience that was representative, we would definitely do that. But I'm going to share a little bit about my story because I think we're in a faith-based crowd here, right? And so I feel the freedom to do that. And so I just thank you for that. So we'll go through the slides. Are you able to put the slides up on the monitor here too for me? Thanks so much. But I just want to tell you, human trafficking we all know that it's horrible. Our hearts are ripped out from just watching the videos. It's happening everywhere. There's a misconception that it's foreigners. Foreigners maybe have been brought here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about who really are at risk for that. But I want to share with you that this is from the paper from February 17th. And there was just a leader of the International Human Trafficking and Prostitution Ring arrested. It was done by counties Bergen County, Hudson County, Middlesex County, Passaic County, and Rockland County. This is in our neighborhood. This is going on right here. It is, as they said in the video, it's a crime in plain sight. And so, I'll have this article if anybody wants to read it, or maybe we could send it out when you send out your other things. But this is just hot off the press, and it's just happening right here in our neighborhood. So I am just really thankful to have you here, and I'd like to open up with a question, which is, what brought you here today. Because we were snowed out the first time, so we knew people weren't going to be here. But today, you could be busy doing other things. And so I would just like to get your input of, if you heard about this event, and there are other things that you could be doing, what was it that propelled you to come here today? You could just raise your hand or shout it out. Anybody? Justice? Injustice. Okay. But you could still be at home with injustice, but you came here to hear about it. You wanted to learn more about it? You want to see justice. Excellent.
I like to hear more stories, just to raise my awareness more.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard stories here and there, but it's good to get stories like you presented today.
Mm-hmm.
More of an understanding of what's out there that I haven't seen.
Okay, excellent. So to hear more stories.
I wanted to find out more of the signs, because I heard a story about somebody and it was just so surprising what was going on, and I would have never thought to look for that. So I think there's got to be so many signs there that we're just totally aware of.
That's exactly right. In fact, at our table over there for the coalition, we have a postcard, and there are red flags that are on this site because it is such a common question. So, so I'm really thankful to have you here and to make the effort to come and spend this morning with us to learn about this issue. And so let's talk about exactly what is human trafficking first. We'll describe it. I would tell you, let me just share a little bit about my story. You can read the story of somebody's daughter if you just Google my name, Susan Panzica, and somebody's daughter, it will come up, because there was it is the Chicken Soup for the Soul story. But it does talk a little bit about my journey, because I would tell you, like 10 years ago, I didn't know anything about human trafficking. But I began to hear the words human trafficking about 10 years ago. You may recall that the Super Bowl was coming to New Jersey in 2014, February. And in 2013, I began to hear a lot more of these terms. But I didn't really know much about what it meant. But what I did was I began to ask people, have you heard about this? Because now there were billboards and there were things, because the Attorney General Task Force, I didn't know at the time, but was raising this awareness because many consider the Super Bowl and other sporting events as attraction events for traffickers. And so they were publicizing it. We don't hear as much about it now, but it is more in our vernacular. And so I just began to say to people, like, have you heard about this? And person after person after person would respond with the same thing by saying, yes, I always wanted to get involved, but I didn't know how. And what began to happen was people began to just kind of gravitate towards me. And I thought of Noah and the ark, Noah knows a calamity's coming, right? And he's been told, and he's preparing for it. And all of a sudden, the animals started coming. And he didn't go knock on the animals' doors and say, you really need to know about this. Come on. They just came to him. And I felt that was almost what was happening in my life, was people that were coming to me. And so we began this group called Justice Network. And we are a volunteer group located locally. And then we became part of the coalition because my daughter began hearing about this. And in the story of Justice Network, there's somebody's daughter story, there's a little bit about her story. She was living in Australia at the time, and I had this dream that she was trafficked. And I had seen the movie Taken, which frankly is not about human trafficking as we really know it. It's more about a particular set of skills that Liam Neeson can, develop. But after this dream was so real, I woke up and I thought Liam Neeson said it takes, the first 24 hours are the most important. And I knew it took 24 hours to get to Australia. And so, but I started looking for flights as if I had a particular set of skills. When I got there, I could do something. I still didn't know. But it was a dream. But when I woke up from it and I heard back from my daughter, and that she was okay. And I just had two thoughts. One was, thank God it's not my daughter, followed by, but it was somebody's daughter. And I just had this certainty, and that was kind of part of what propelled me. And in this time, I saw different things that, like, I always thought somebody should do something about that, and then I realized I am somebody. Or, different quotes that that came up. And so I reached out. A friend of mine had done a post and said, wait, let me just. She did a post about something similar to Crown Free with items that were, oops, I'm sorry, items that were made to provide economic empowerment for survivors of human trafficking. And I said, I would like to do something about, and I said, oh, I'm really interested in this. And then someone said to me, if you do something, let me know. And those words were the catalyst, because I saw them and I said, am I going to do something, or am I going to continue to want to do something but never actually do the something? I said, I have to do something. And so my friend and I got together, the two, we watched a movie, and she said, I wonder how we can make a difference from here. And I began to feel overwhelmed. I said, there are, at the time, they were talking 27 million people in slavery. And I thought, what can two real housewives from New Jersey do against 27 million? And I thought of the prophet Elijah and his servant, who were faced with an army coming against them. And the servant was terrified. And Elijah said, I'm going to pray for you that your eyes will be opened, and you will see that there are more that are with us than with them. And the servant saw all the heavenly armies, but for me, God was saying, there are 27 million in slavery. There are 7 billion in the world. And most of them would be against human trafficking if they knew about it and if they knew what to do about it. And that set my course of action, is to let people know about it and to let people know that there are things that you can do. Because when I was watching these films, it was very emotional. Their stories are heart-rending. It says, know the signs. And then what do you do? What do you do with that, right? And so that's really what I feel like my mission is. So what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining a person through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of forced labor or sexual orientation. It takes many forms. The one that we saw this morning, the form was sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is where the one that we hear about the most. And we see it more in the United States. I'm going to explain that in a few minutes. But it could be some of the stories that we saw today through the sexting, through being sold in through a strip club, through any of these places. It could be hotels and motels, truck stops. And then there's labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is where a person is forced or coerced into performing labor or services. It could be something called debt bondage. So say in other countries, often like in India, there may be generational debt bondage where the family owes a debt and it's passed on through the generations. And even though people may get paid, their debt continues to increase, and so they're continually working in this situation. We had, in May of last year, in New Jersey, in Robbinsville, New Jersey, the largest bust of labor trafficking in the United States, probably in history. It was a Sikh temple in Robbinsville, New Jersey. And what they were doing was they were recruiting people from India who were artisans to work on this temple. They told them that it was a great opportunity. You'll be working in the United States. They came, the people in charge there took the passports for safekeeping. So now these people don't even have their identity. They were housed in like tin mobile homes that weren't like mobile homes. They were tin dormitories behind it. And they were not free to leave the premises. They worked many hard and long hours. And over 150 men were extracted in this operation through various law enforcements in May of 2021, probably the largest labor trafficking. So we do have labor trafficking in the United States. We have it we are the Garden State, and so we have a lot of farm workers that are transient and they are being forced. So labor trafficking looks like that. We also had, a couple of years ago, there was a woman who had escaped from a home in Upper Saddle River, and she was being housed under the stairs. She was brought there, and she was a domestic servant, right? She was a nanny and, taking care of the household. One of our Justice Network members was involved with the extraction of a young man in Clifton who had worked on a cruise ship, met a very engaging couple. They said he's from Indonesia. They said, come and live with us and work in our store in the United States. You can send money home to your family. And when he was brought here, he was not free. He was a Christian, and he begged them to let him just go to the church across the street, which is where our friend went. And he did not escape that day. He continued back. But then eventually it just got so terrible that he was extracted through the people in the church that were across the street from him. The key element, though, is people can work for low income. People can choose to be involved in prostitution. But what makes it human trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. It's the commercial exploitation of an individual through force, fraud, and coercion that makes it human trafficking. They're being forced in pornography, in prostitution, servitude for little or no money. Another category is minors. So force, fraud, or coercion is a requirement by law for human trafficking. But if the person is under 18 years of age, it is off the table. They do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion, which means that if a minor is willing to engage in this behavior, but by the nature of their age and not reaching the age of accountability, they are considered to be victims of human trafficking. And that is really important because when they are categorized in that as a victim of human trafficking, they are afforded services by the government that would enable them to get on with their life. So minors are considered victims of human trafficking. Now, why? We heard that it was the second largest criminal enterprise. Back when I first got involved in this 10 years ago, it was the third largest. But human trafficking has surpassed arms trafficking and is only second to drug trafficking. And it's because of money. The money is the driving force. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this more, but just let me explain. If you are a drug trafficker and you sell drugs to someone, now you have to get more drugs to continue your trade. If you sell a gun, you have to now get more guns to continue your trade. But when you control a human being and you sell their services, you can sell them over and over and over and over again, many times in the same night. And so they are finding that human trafficking is so profitable that they are moving away from things that deplete to human trafficking. Now, there is one thing that I just want to make mention of, and that is there is a confusion, I think, in our culture, and it comes from just misunderstanding, but it also comes from government sources, and the media have talked about smuggling and calling it trafficking, and they're two different things. I was telling somebody, even about, some of what I'm involved in, and the response is what's happening at the southern border, which I'm not saying there's not trafficking there, because smuggling is a risk factor that can lead to trafficking. But here's the big difference. Smuggling is the movement of people, can be across borders, can be a risk factor, but it's not by itself trafficking. Victims can be trafficked from their homes. We saw it in the video. Victims are all over. Movement, it's unfortunate because trafficking just implies movement, but movement does not have to be involved. And here, I'm going to explain this definition that I just got from someone from Homeland Security. Smuggling is transportation-based. It involves the movement of people, often across borders, and it's mostly voluntary. The target wants to come to the United States, so it is a crime against the country of the United States. They're breaking a law of the country. Human trafficking is exploitation-based. It is not voluntary, and it is a crime against the individual being trafficked. See the difference? Smuggling is a crime against the country. Trafficking is a crime against the individual that is being coerced. Now, where does human trafficking occur? It occurs everywhere around the world. So just some of these figures real quick is that New Jersey, that number 12, implies that of calls to the national hotline, New Jersey was 12th in the nation of suspected cases of human trafficking. So when you consider the size of our state, that's pretty high up there. Around the world, sex trafficking is only about 20% of the trafficking. 80% is labor trafficking around the world. It's almost the opposite in the United States, where in the United States, forced labor is only about 30% and 70% is sex trafficking. So that's why we hear about sex trafficking so much more here in the United States. But when we look at the issue globally, labor trafficking is so much more prevalent. Bringing it close to home, why is New Jersey so high? Well, we're the most densely populated state in the United States. I don't know if even though we're the Garden State, we have more people per square mile than any other state across the state. Our location is we are a transit state. People just drive through, and what do they say? What exit? You're from New Jersey? What exit, right? I mean, people are just used to driving through New Jersey. We have large sporting events here, in addition to the one-time Super Bowl. But sporting events, and I just want to put this caveat out there, is there are many trafficking organizations, not anti-trafficking organizations, that really don't want to focus on Super Bowl or NASCAR or Final Four or any of these large sporting events because human trafficking occurs 365 days a year, right? So we don't want to just say, oh, it's the Super Bowl, it's human trafficking. What about the rest of 364 days? So, but anecdotally, the stories that we heard, we know from trafficking victims that they have been brought to different places where there were sporting events. And sometimes, I remember after the Super Bowl in New Jersey, there was an article in the paper about a mother from Florida who brought her 15-year-old daughter to New Jersey for the opportunity to make money that she would traffic her daughter. She didn't call it trafficking. It was just the two of them. But it's in their minds that these large sporting events, you have people coming who are away from home, who have money to burn. They're not feeling necessarily the responsibilities that they might in their home environment. We are close to New York City and Philadelphia. We have Atlantic City. So why does human trafficking happen? As I said before, money is the big factor. The key is, and this is what I want to drive home and what I'm going to talk about later too, is if we can end the demand for human trafficking, and then people wouldn't be making money from human trafficking, and we would end human trafficking, right? If we can end the demand, right, supply and demand, if we can end that demand, we would end human trafficking. So when we compare, I said about labor trafficking being so prevalent around the world, in every country in the world, poverty is the #1 factor that contributes to human trafficking, with one exception. That one exception is the United States. In every country, it's economic empowerment. And so companies like Crown Free and different ones that we're going to have at our event in May, they know that if they can economically empower people, then they would not have to resort to what's happening with trafficking. The exception is the United States. The #1 contributing factor to trafficking in the United States is the breakdown of the family. It is what is called in psychological terms ACEs. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Families trafficking their children, overlooking it, disruption, foster care. It is the breakdown of the family and these ACEs that is the #1 contributing factor in the United States. So who are the victims? Human trafficking can affect anyone. There is no exclusion of race or wealth or anything in society that you would judge someone by. Anyone can be a victim of human trafficking, and they have been. From as young as infants that are under a year old. One of our more recent cases was a 73-year-old woman was trafficked. At this point, let me just get to the next slide. Trafficking can affect anyone, but everyone can help prevent it. Everyone. There is something that you can walk away today and make a difference in helping to fight human trafficking. At this point, I would show a video, but I think the stories that we've seen are similar, so I'm not going to show the video, but I am going to give you the link. It's 6 minutes long, and it's called Stop This Traffic. This is the start of it.
You just take a seat.
All right.
So we're gonna go
Thank
to
you
this.
so much for coming in. I'm Mary, by the way.
Miriam, tonight.
Tonight, nice to meet you.
But,
Don't mind
just
the
in
giant mic.
interest of time, and we want to have Q&A, and I know that you guys are talkers because we've already been doing that. I want to give you enough time for that. But I encourage you to watch this video, but it's similar. It's telling the stories of 3 different victims of human trafficking. But at the end of that video, it's extremely powerful, and it shows the magnitude of the number of people, and it compares it to New Jersey. And that video took place in West Michigan, which is the one little part of it. And if there were that many, we correlated to how many victims there are, how many people live in the state of New Jersey. So let's just talk a little bit about the vulnerabilities. And if I'm going really fast, I apologize. I don't want to be repetitive for what you've heard, but I really do want to focus on what can you do about it? You know, after I was watching those videos, they were so compelling, and it says know the signs. And then the question is, okay, if I know the signs and I see the signs, what do I do with what I know? And so I would like to really get into that kind of a discussion. But let's just talk about some of the vulnerabilities that we see. We saw it in the stories that were here. There's a naivety among children, especially minors, who are most at risk for human trafficking, our younger ones. So they don't have a big worldview. There could be problems at home. The one boy said his mother wouldn't miss him, right? Because they were arguing. That's from a child's point of view, right? As a parent, you're like, well, of course I would, right? Or the mother of the girl that was in the car I think she was hurt as her daughter continued to be on the phone texting, not realizing what was happening there. But the most important thing a parent can do is to be the safe person for their child, so that that child knows no matter what she's done, even though she sent that picture, her mother is a safe person to go to admit what she did wrong, and that the mother would not, or the parent would not say, what are you, crazy? What did you do? Didn't you know that could? The mother has to be the person to say, understand, we'll work it through. That is the environment that the parent must set up for the child to be able to know that the parent is a safe person to come to. And it doesn't mean that, you're always the perfect parent or you're not going to have arguments with your kids, but the parent needs to know. And I had a situation that was brought to my attention about a girl that was, she was touched inappropriately. And she and the mom, like they didn't always get along, and they were always at odds with each other. But when this situation happened, her mom was the first person that she came to. Because even though they didn't get along, she knew that she was the safe person, and that mom sprung into action. So problems at home. Foster care, even foster care goes up to 18 years old. There are places, it happens here, but I know it happens overseas. I work with someone who works with an orphanage in Ukraine. The traffickers wait outside. When a child reaches 18 years old, they're just thrown out into the world. And so the traffickers are waiting for them to age out of the foster care system. But even within foster care, it happens within foster families. So all of these, having a disability, we did a presentation a couple of years ago with the coalition about the intersection between disabilities and human trafficking. And remarkably, it was a mentally disabled girl who was able to give testimony that was the largest and biggest first arrest under the new trafficking law that we had. And so we don't discount them because she was able to provide the information that was needed to arrest this particular trafficker. And there's a film that Justice Network is partnering with another group. It's coming out in the theaters on April 29th called The Sound of Violet. And it's about an autistic man who falls in love with a woman who's being trafficked. And it's compelling. It's not a perfect film, but it's compelling. We are going to be raising awareness about the film coming out in April, and then we're going to do a showing of it ourselves, probably in the fall. LGBTQ youth. We were talking about that a little bit at the table. These kids are so at risk for human trafficking because there's so much insecurity that they're just experiencing. And then substance abuse. Substance abuse can be a factor, a risk factor for someone who they want to continually get more drugs, and so they're pimped. But it's also a control mechanism that someone who is not a drug abuser but a trafficker may use to get their victim addicted to drugs so that the pimp becomes the pusher for them. These are some examples that we saw in the film of false love. The term boyfriending, the fact that the word boyfriend became a verb, to me is, they're using this boyfriending tactic. And so the girl, usually in most cases, but it could be a boy too, believes that this person is her protector, and they begin to woo her, and the gifts, and you are the one. This is probably the most prevalent. There are also job offers like modeling, and if you come to this room in this place, and we'll take pictures, and candy and magazine sales, gang recruitment, familial trafficking is far more prevalent, we're learning, than we ever knew before, that families are trafficking their children. survival sex is a category of trafficking where the person may be willing, but they feel that the girl who was the mother, the 16-year-old mother, was engaged in survival sex. And so it's the only way that they know that they can make money to support themselves, or in her case, her child. And then online is going to get its own slide, because since March of 2020, we had everybody, kids, schools went virtual. Kids were on the computer far more than they ever had been before. And now we are never going to get away from it, even if we're hybrid. These kids are now in a culture where school's online, their gaming is online, and they're always online. And traffickers are online. Traffickers are master manipulators. One of the things that they do is it's called mirror language, like looking in a mirror. So say a boy is playing Fortnite or Minecraft or one of the games that they're in, and there's another 14-year-old boy that he's playing with that he's never seen before, or he's never met. He's an online, doesn't know that that's really a 35-year-old man. Doesn't know, he thinks it's a kid like him. And they can chat through these games. Mirror talk is where the trafficker says what the victim says in his own words. So my mom, is hovering over my shoulder. Oh, yeah, my mom too. I know what you mean. They continue to parrot back so that this child develops this empathy. And it goes on. Traffickers are very patient in this type of trafficking. The trafficker will wait and wait until he knows that that child is going to be receptive to maybe meeting him somewhere. And don't tell your parents, because, we both know they won't know what's going on, and they set up, but they're very, very patient. There's a movie that we used to show, and it's a really good movie, from an organization called Shared Hope. And in that, there's a young girl who is a nursing student. She's taking college credits. She's, like in A++, and she's working as a waitress. And she engages with her customers at the table. And she's talking to them and like, oh yeah, where do you want to go? And what school do you want to go to? And they find out so much about her because she wants good tips. She's friendly. She has no idea that they're collecting all this information. And they're older men, they seem no risk. Young guy comes in and he already knows everything about her. And so he's able to engage with her. And she's telling her own story. It's not a fictionalized account. And she was this close to leaving with him to go from Washington State to Phoenix. And she would have been a trafficking victim were it not for someone knowing the signs, right? So, we were talking about it. And so when we're talking about gaming, this is happening maybe not in a restaurant, but it's happening online, where the kids are engaging with people that they don't know who's on the other side of the screen. And so they are master manipulators. They offer gifts. In a game, there's something called V-Bucks, where kids can play more. And so they know how to work this for the kids. These are apps that this screen will change over time, because there's constantly new apps that are coming out that are providing opportunities for kids. But we know Snapchat, we know Fortnite and Minecraft have been used, and these are just some other ones. Can you see which ones they are? Kik is another one. And these are apps that traffickers have used to engage with kids. We talked about, in the film, they talked about all the different signs. This is just our New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking anagram of what red flags are, and we have these at the table if you want to take it. Like we said, human trafficking can affect anyone, but everyone can help prevent it. So these are some of the red flags that we've already learned about today. And this is a key one. They did address it in the videos. I want to talk about it. One of the most frequent questions that I receive is, why don't the victims leave? And there's mental component, particularly to sex trafficking, but also with labor trafficking, that victims are brainwashed, they're gaslighted, they often do not even know that they are a victim. They have a boyfriend that is showing them attention who says, we need this money, and if you do this, it's a sign that you love me. I remember, this just popped in my head, but I remember that we had a contest once about a poem, and I just felt saying, this is a common phrase that a trafficker will use. If you will do this if you love me. We need to train our girls and our boys to say, if you loved me, you wouldn't ask me to do that, right? But they don't have that strength right now to do that because they're been so brainwashed. But that's where we want to get our youth to understand, if you loved me, you wouldn't ask me to do that. Some of the tactics that they use, sleep and food deprivation. One of the survivors that I've worked with, she said that she was given the choice of sleep or food, a choice. She said, I always took sleep because I didn't know if I would be able to. And so, she was just wasting away, but she always took sleep over food. They're deprived, and it changes their ability to think. It makes them powerless. Another tactic, they think often it's their fault. If I hadn't sent that picture, or if I hadn't played this game, if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't be going down the road. It's my fault. Or no one will believe me. How many times do we hear that in the other films? People wouldn't believe them, right? And that does happen. It happens if a father is abusing the daughter and the daughter tells the mother, and the mother is like, no, you're reading it wrong. We have to listen to our kids. But there's forced drug use. So like I said, sometimes the pimp becomes the pusher and is the one that supplies it, and they need to keep getting that fix. And then most commonly is what we call a trauma bond, where there is a bond that develops. You may have heard the term Stockholm Syndrome, which came from when there were bank robbers in Stockholm that kept the people as hostages. And the people who were forced to stay there became supportive of the people that were holding them captive through brainwashing techniques. And this is what happens. This trauma bond continues between the victim and the trafficker. So they don't leave. Many times because they don't know that they can, or even if they know that they can, what will they do? What will they do? They don't know. They don't know the options that are out there. They don't know that there are people like us that are willing to intervene on their behalf. They don't know. They feel just alone and isolated. And so they don't know that they can go home. So, with all that, what can we do about it? I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the coalition is doing about it. The coalition is a connection of over 170, I think we're over 200 organizations in the state of New Jersey working to end human trafficking. It's collaborative. What I felt when I came here and in dealing with April and dealing with the women from the plant is there's a collaboration right here in our town. Right? It's palpable. We can feel that we are all different parts of the body working together, and we all bring something to the table. The coalition is like that, where there are faith-based groups, there are LGBTQ groups, there are government groups, law enforcement, educators, people from all walks of life are all concerned about this issue, working together, and we find that you can do so much more when you work together. So we have over 200 members, affiliate organizations, as well as individuals, and you join the coalition through a committee. So there were 17, there's now 18 committees. Even in, I was talking about banking today. A woman worked in Wells Fargo and she could see, we said money is huge. We are now working through our banking committee to educate the bankers of what to look for in their chain of money because so much money laundering. Through the banking committee, we were able to create an act that would restore credit to a survivor. For example, a survivor is now extracted, is now living a life, maybe married with kids. This is a true story. And this woman was promoted. They did a credit check. They found out about her past history, which had nothing to do. So she ended up losing her job instead of getting the promotion. But she'd come so far. So what we've been able to do is influence, I'm going to talk about it actually a little bit more with Advocate, but influence legislation that will help clear the record from being observed in that sort of situation. Because many times a victim's credit is ruined because their trafficker makes the victim open loans, open bank accounts. The victim is the one who is all on paper, and the trafficker is in the shadows behind the scenes. So all of this is in the victim's name. And so what we're working to do is with calling vacatur of the record, expungement. Those two things are a little different. One will remove it altogether as if it never happened. The other one will remove it from being visible. But it's still there because maybe there's still a court case. And we can't pretend it never happened because that's evidence to help convict someone, right? So we have different levels, and we're working to clear those records so that people can actually have a meaningful life. So we're connecting with the different organizations, and we're educating. I'm here today. We are in schools. I have a teacher in Pascack Hills or Pascack Valley. Every year she asks me to come and talk to her social studies class. And I'm like, yep, I will. We did it virtually. We've done it in person. I just got an email from her this week. We have curriculum that we can share with the teachers. Now, if any of you are we have an education committee, and it's just outstanding. We worked with the Department of Education, and just recently, if you go onto SaferNJ.org, which is the coalition's website, you will see that we were instrumental in working with the Department of Education in creating standards that school districts will have to follow regarding education of young people about the risks of human trafficking. It's statewide, and it just came out, I think, this month. So it's like really exciting. We've been working on it for a long time, and things are postponed, and we had pandemic, but things are happening. In fact, that reminds me, because I may forget it later, because this is what happens to me. I'm like all over the place. But one of the things, it said in the video, I'm going to say it at the end too, is about calling the national hotline, right? We're going to have you do something about that. But I just want to tell you a story of a friend of mine who worked in Oakland. She worked in the Copper Tree Plaza. You may have gone there for the DMV. There was a massage parlor there for a long time, right by where the DMV is. She called the hotline, and she called it several times, and she's like, I know there's traffic going in there. Why? Because she saw the signs. She saw the people, the men that were going in there late at night to get a massage, right? She saw the people that were being dropped off in the morning. So she knew, and she made the report. And she's like, nothing's happening. I'm like, something's happening, right? You made the report. And what did happen was maybe like a year or two, it was at least 2 or 3 years later, that massage parlor was raided, and all those people were brought to justice. But what happens is, you make a report, the law enforcement can't just go in. They need to create evidence, right? Because it has to hold up in court. You know, a lot of times we watch these movies, like Liam Neeson going in beating up people, but that doesn't really get to the problem of prosecution and giving enough to the lawyers after the law enforcement. It's like law and order, right? We have to look at both sides of it. So they had to create evidence, and those people were brought to justice through her call. So I just say that things are happening, even though a lot of times it just seems like things are getting worse. So we educate and then we advocate. And that was what I was just talking about, where our legislative committee is so dynamic. It is the one committee that I absolutely want nothing to do with because there's so much politics that are involved. But uniquely, human trafficking, the laws that we have put forward to be passed, different bills, have passed unanimously. It doesn't matter what your political affiliation was. Democrats, Republicans voted unanimously on the laws that we put forward. The reason is the people who are on that committee are so well versed in which would be the best representative to represent this issue about education or about banking or whatever the things are. So they know all that. That's why that's not my area of expertise. But I will brag about them because we have had, just in the time that I've been with them, many legislative victories, both in the state of New Jersey and also the Debt Bondage Repair Act, which was a federal act that we were able to influence. So it's really exciting of some of the things that the legislative committee is doing. But it takes time. So now, that's what the coalition is doing. I encourage you to go on the coalition's website and look at the list of now 18 committees and see, is there a place where you would fit that you would join through a committee? It would be something that you are interested in doing. Some of the committees are open, some of them are not. You'd have to be a part of it to get on. But we meet about once a month, now virtually, which has been really easy since we are across the state, so it makes it a lot easier. We used to have a phone and people couldn't hear if you weren't there in person. But anybody can join now through Zoom. So I really do encourage you to see what the work of the coalition is doing. And it's amplifying the work of, say, our little organization of Justice Network. But what can you do? That is the big question, right? Because I want you to walk away from here with something, knowing that there are things that you can do without becoming, even a member of the coalition or leaving your home. There are things that you can do. So the first thing is what you're doing today is to educate yourself, right? Now you know. I'm looking around the room, I'm thinking, not all of you will remember this, but when I was a kid, there was a commercial for, I think it was shampoo, and it would be two people, told two people, and all of a sudden, all these people knew about it, right? So if one person tells, now two people know. Now if two people know, and they tell two people, then four people will know, and so on. So the more that you educate, and ask questions, you don't have to have the answers, but you have the questions. We will find the answers, but reach out to other people. So educating yourself is the first thing. Know not just what it is, but how to prevent it and how to support those who are affected by it. And you can do it in a variety of ways. I'm actually working on a book, if I ever settle down for this, but it's called, I'm calling it now, we'll see what it turns out to be, What's in Your Hands? Because when Moses was called to deliver the nation of Israel out of slavery in Egypt, and he met God at a burning bush. And God is telling him, you're going to bring the people out. And he's inquiring about it. Do you know what God asked him? He said, what is in your hands? He had a staff. A staff was just a tool of his trade. It helped him with his sheep. He was a shepherd. It was an ordinary article of his everyday life. But God did a miracle with it, right? He turned it into a serpent and picked it up. It became back a snake. His hand went in. It got leprosy. It went back. But the question was, what's in your hands? So I'm going to say, one thing that's in your hands is your cell phone, right? So I'm going to ask you, we'll get to the next slide. I'll put it up on the screen, to put the national hotline number in your cell phone. Because if you see something, you want to do two things. You want to have the number in your phone because you can make a call, right? If you make a call and it turns out to be nothing, there's no harm done. No one will ever penalize you for making a call of a suspicion. However, if you don't call, you might have missed an opportunity to help someone. But when I talked to my friend at the FBI, who's part of our coalition, and I said, what do you want people to know, like about calling? She said, tell them to just get as much information as you can, right? Can you get a license plate? That would be awesome, but you might not be able to. But what do they look like? What can you tell them? What is their engagement? What is your suspicions? Get as many facts as you can to be able to report to help law enforcement. Because there's one thing you should never do. You should never enter the situation. First of all, if you see someone that's by themselves that you suspect being trafficked, if you engage with that person, not only are you putting yourself at risk, you are putting the person you want to help at risk, because there's no doubt that she or he is being watched. And when you leave, that person could get punished by their trafficker for just having talked to you. You never want to interfere in that situation because there are professionals that can do that. But what you can't do is collect as much information about the scenario as you can and report it to those in law enforcement. Now, let me just make this statement. When you report to the national hotline, you are not reporting to law enforcement. There is a phone number in New Jersey that does report directly to law enforcement. We don't have that in our PowerPoint, and there's a reason for it. It's a good number, but when that phone rings to that, you are calling a detective who's going to immediately, first of all, it's not anonymous because they have your phone number. Second of all, it becomes a law enforcement issue. When you call the national hotline, it is survivor informed. There are services that are available. We want victims to call the national hotline. So they are directed, and if it's a law enforcement issue, it goes immediately to the law enforcement jurisdiction. So you want to know where you are, in the location of where it took place, so that they could report it to the right place. So you want to educate yourself. You want to be able to intervene. But the easiest thing to do, anybody can do this, is the second item is to choose fair trade or ethically sourced merchandise, products in your environment. Whatever you're going to buy, look to see if there is slavery in the supply chain, because like I said, globally, labor trafficking is far more prevalent. And there are some industries, particularly those, ironically, that start with the letter C: coffee, chocolate, cocoa, cotton. Next, February 20, I forget the date, SaferNJ.org has it. We're doing a presentation about the cotton industry. Cotton it's not just in the United States, right? It's like global, but there's actually state-mandated slavery in, I think it's Uzbekistan, where people are conscripted and required to work in their cotton industry. So cotton, chocolate, coffee, computers, cars, and then this last one has a C in it, but it's mica, M-I-C-A. We have mica in cosmetics, we have it in computers. All of those industries have a lot of slave labor in them. Shrimp from Thailand, frozen shrimp. You may have heard, it was about a year or two ago, that a fishing boat happened to go ashore on an island, and it was these young men from Thailand that were brought to do the fishing shrimp. So you want to know where your shrimp is coming from. There's the Sweat and Toil app from the Department of Labor, which you can download on your phone. I find it kind of hard to use. There's also justice-network.org, my organization. I boast all this time, even though I had nothing to do with it, but we had someone in our organization create a resource list, which is the largest, most comprehensive list of companies that deal with ethically produced and fair trade merchandise. We've looked, we haven't found another list as comprehensive as this. Right now, Lynette back here is working to update the list and to keep it as current as possible. But when people say, when I tell you, you should look for fair trade, that's a place where you can go. And a lot of it is online, and then there's also some local places as well. A call to action. Like I said, the legislative committee puts out a call to action. Get on the email list. When they say call your senator, your state senator, or your state assemblyman, it takes you like 2 minutes, but your phone call is counted in that legislator's office. And they know, the more people that call, they know it's an important issue. So when we put out a call to action, it takes none of your time, but you can call your legislator and let them know that you support that. Donate your time, your money, your treasure. Just donate to a survivor-informed organization. There are some organizations out there that are not survivor-informed. But when you are survivor-informed, you know from the people that have lived experience what would have helped them. And so, the donations that you can do. Like I said, join. And then here is the National Human Trafficking Hotline is 888-3737-888. You can also text help or info, if you want to provide information, to the letters Be Free, which is 233733. So you can put both of those in there if you want to do it by text or phone. There's also a lot of information that you can receive from the National Hotline, which is organized by the organization called Polaris, from North Star and Leading People to Freedom. The last thing that I'm going to ask you to do is, if you can, take a picture of this QR code or the Survey Monkey, because what this will do is help us to measure our impact. The coalition is a completely volunteer organization, and so we never compete for a grant funding for something that maybe one of our member organizations would go for. We always look for something different. But when we're looking for funding, by measuring the impact that we have, it helps us. So it helps us to know like how many people were here, and what would you do? What would be your next step? You put the phone number in your phone, but what would be another step that you might want to do? What would you want to learn about or know about or pursue? So this survey will give us that information. It's anonymous, but it really does help us to collect some of that information. And so, let's see, it's 11:48. So I would like to know if anybody has any questions or anything that you'd like to talk more about or anything I could explain. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is a great question. So when someone was brought to the United States as a result of an illegal crime, an illegal activity on our part, they are afforded certain services. So they're I forget the name of the act that gave them this, but they can get what's called a T visa, right? Trafficking victims can get a T visa that allows them to stay here provisionally, because we do want them here because we do want to pursue justice for the traffickers, right? And it allows them to get employment. And there are organizations, one of them, I could tell you off the top of my head, a Christian organization called Bethany. People are familiar with Bethany about adoption, right? They do a lot of adoptive services, but they also work with victims who were brought here, and particularly this T visa program. So they have caseworkers, and they have employment opportunities, they have training, they have all sorts of things to help those people. Because that's a huge question, because many times they are here illegally, which makes them more afraid, right, to even report, because, you know, the climate sometimes tends to do that. The last thing I want to say, also, again, a thing that just popped into my head, but about ending demand. I believe that we can change the culture in this country to address the issue of demand, because we're moving in this pendulum, right? But there are TV shows and things that influence our kids. For example, there was a TV show, I forget what it was, MTV or something, called Pimp My Car, right? A show like that, or Teen and Pregnant, right? What those do, those types of shows, is they start to desensitize the stigma against these things that really are not good. Like as if pimping is a good thing. It's a bad thing, right? Or, you know, being a pregnant teen, it's, you know, it's great that she kept her child, but, you know, we don't want a stigma upon that. What we want to do is we want to change the culture so that the things that people are valuing now that they shouldn't be, we're going to change. And so I love talking to high schoolers and tell them that I might not see an end to human trafficking in my time, but I believe that you will in yours, because you're going to be the generation that's going to raise up and say, trafficking is not acceptable. It is not cool. I heard a study done in the state of Washington where they used Google and another search engine to find out when was the peak time that someone would search for the services of a prostitute. What time of day do you think it would be, or what day of the week do you think that would be? That's what I think a lot of people would think. After 10 o'clock, that would be a nighttime. You know when the most common time was? During the week, around 2 o'clock. Because men were looking for something on their way home to their families. It's like horrifying. But what if it was their daughter? It's somebody's daughter, right? That's like, you know, we need to let these people know that we need to change the culture. And when I was first involved with the coalition, there was a woman who was a researcher at Rutgers and Montclair State, and she was doing a big study on this very thing of what makes someone seek out the services, right? And she was working with mostly men who had sought out the services. And she was working also with Microsoft. And Microsoft said, we don't want our products used for this. So if someone's going down a certain internet highway there, we can stop it. And what she said was, no, you don't want to stop it, because you know what's going to happen? Then they go on to what's called the dark web, and it's harder to find. She said, what about if they went there and you put up a pop-up that said, does your wife know what you're doing? Or what would your daughter say about this? Or, you know, just, they didn't come up with language, but something to stop that person from taking this direction that they're going in. And that's what we do, I think, to change our culture, is to change the way of people's thinking and to realize that the people who are victims of human trafficking, even if they think that this is what they want to do or they have no other choice, they don't want to be doing it. They want to be restored. They want to be whole. They want identity, and it's robbed from them. So anyway, that was kind of a long tangent, but yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point. Changing the culture, changing the people that report things in the media, for example. There is a reporter in Passaic County who, when there would be an arrest like the one that I shared with you that just happened, would actually publicize sometimes the prostitutes and their names and their pictures. And they're the victims in this scenario. So we are trying to really encourage law enforcement and the media to say, they're the victims. You arrest the seller and the buyer. Like if it was a drug transaction, it would be the seller and the buyer. You know, the commodity in the middle that they're selling is a human being. They are a victim. They are not the ones that need to be arrested. So before the Super Bowl in Los Angeles, there's an organization called SOAP, S-O-A-P. It was started by a woman named Teresa Flores, who herself was a trafficking victim when she was younger. And they go before the Super Bowl with literature. They do training of hundreds of people. 400 people from the community were trained to go out to hotels and motels and let the people working there know these are missing children. There's a poster of missing children that they share. Have you seen any of these? Many of these children were found by law enforcement after this because a tip came through from a particular hotel. But they also put bars of soap into the hotel rooms that have the trafficking hotline number there with the phrase, are you being forced to do something you don't want to do? So to your point about the arrests and the language that we use in changing the culture is Teresa Flores just posted something on Facebook about the arrests that took place during this time out in Los Angeles. 400 people were arrested. Of the 400, I don't have the exact number, but of the 400, say 120 of them were traffickers, 80 of them were buyers. And that was who was arrested, and that's awesome. But my head says, who were the other 200 that were arrested? But I do not believe it's the victims. I believe, and I'll see if, I did ask her, so we'll see what she comes back with. But involved in this whole scenario are drivers and people working in hotels and people who are engaged in these lesser activities but are contributing to it. So I'm guessing that that's who those people were. But yes, our law enforcement is being trained to know that the victim is not the one that you arrest. And that is a huge cultural shift in our law enforcement. A friend of mine who is a trafficking survivor was arrested for prostitution. This was in Florida years ago. And the police officer said, you know what, before you go, I'm going to just take my turn, you know. And so it makes the victim less likely to trust law enforcement. They're not safe people, you know, when they do things like that. So yeah, we really do want to be training law enforcement and the media to report accurately. So, yes. That's hard for me to answer. My first response is pray for her, pray for the people around her, but also like a specific action step, I would call the national hotline and ask them because they may know of services in her area. They may know that there are people that would be able to intercede. If that school system maybe has a counselor that would be, you know, equipped for that conversation, I would call them because they're a great resource. Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share with you. I just thank you for coming out on this day when I know there are things that you could be doing. But what I'm going to ask you to do is to take this survey and really to let us know, in addition to putting the hotline number in your phone. Is there another action step that you would consider doing? You know, just make a decision to buy fair trade products or to look for fair trade products, or and put on your calendar. This is another thing. May 14th. May 14th. In North Haledon, we're going to have a fair trade market. We've done it now for 5 years. It's called Justice Rocks because we used to have a rock concert, but now we're just focusing more on the vendors. There'll be a food truck there, but we have a lot of vendors that are coming. We always used to do it in November too because Christmas presents and whatever. But it's really a great opportunity to engage and to hear from each individual vendor, what is their story? How are they providing economic empowerment for people so that they don't have to resort to this, right? There's an organization in Costa Rica which has a huge business called sex tourism, right? You may have heard that term where people would just go there. It's Colombia, there's a couple of places. So a friend of ours was a hairdresser, and they started a company there to train the girls to be cosmetologists and hairdressers so that they don't have to resort to providing prostitution as a source of income. So, you know, we're looking for our vendors to further educate you too, not just to sell their products, but to let you know like how this is benefiting and changing the culture in their country and in the United States as well. So yeah, that's another action step. I hope to see you May 14th, if not before. Okay, thank you so much.